Now we'll move on to a couple of questions. One question, come back.
I don't disagree with the analysis, Minister. I think, intuitively, I would accept and see where you're coming from. The problem I have is that the evidence doesn't necessarily sustain that intuitive approach. And when I approached this issue, I had no issue at all with the proposal in the bill. I would prefer us to do this on a European scale through a TPD, but we are where we are and we need to move forward. How would you respond, though, Minister, to the suggestion and the evidence that we've received that, in fact, the evidence isn't neatly split 50-50 one way or the other? It could go one way, it could go the other. The evidence that we've received has been at times quite clear that by reducing the ability of people to use e-cigarettes, by restricting their place, if you like, in society and the rest of it, what you're actually doing isn't simply balancing harm or taking a precautionary approach to the potential harm in the future. What you're actually doing is creating harm today by making it more difficult for people to give up using tobacco products, and therefore the approach that you're taking isn't precautionary, but one which creates harm and creates harm to people today.
Chair, obviously I've heard those arguments. I may reply to them myself in a moment, but I think on that particular issue, I'll ask Dr. Hussey, if you didn't mind, as the Chief Medical Officer, to take that one first.
Dr. Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that over the months that we've been hearing the emerging evidence, as someone who has to form a view on the advice based on the evidence that's emerging, I have gone through a lot of questioning myself. What's it telling us? Is it giving us a clear signal one way or the other? Do we know with more clarity where we should go? We are dealing with scientific uncertainty and balancing emerging evidence day in, day out, in fact, on what we really understand to be the place of e-cigarettes. The other thing I'm very mindful of is that some of the harms that we learnt about from tobacco, for instance, took decades to understand. The biological harm took that long to actually emerge. I was thinking the other day, cannabis was also one that took years for us to work out the understanding of the balance of those risks. So I think we have to try and make the best sense of, are there signals that young people are interested? Do they know about these products? Yes, they do. Are they experimenting? Yes. Do we know how that will progress? We can't predict the future. We can't be certain. We'll be speculating to some extent, but we can use evidence from other situations to come to some form of judgment there. On the other side, by putting restrictions, I've heard, I think, two arguments I've heard. One is that people might think it's a signal that they're as harmful as tobacco, that e-cigarettes are as harmful. I think the evidence that we've got, I think ASH themselves look at the change in people's perception of the safety of e-cigarettes. And on one hand, it shows there's been an increase in people who think they're less safe. And then on the other hand, quite an increase in people over half who think they're safe. So again, it's that balancing the evidence. So the bigger group actually think they're relatively safe. We've had the reports from Public Health England talking about an estimate of safety, and it's very much an estimate of the likely impacts. So trying to balance all of that. And then the other angle is by limiting use in public spaces, and that's only what we're talking about, and that a large proportion of public places already adopt this approach, what impact will it have on people's aspiration to use them? Will it have some impact that will encourage people to stop using them? In the space of time when we've seen a number of public places bringing in restrictions in those public places, actually the growth of use of e-cigarettes, I think, is up by about 500,000 in Great Britain, the latest figures I've seen. So again, trying to make sense of that evidence, which is probably, again, on balance, we've got some consensus. They do have a role. I think increasingly we're still unclear how effective they are to help quitting, but we know that some people find them useful. We're all agreed, I think, in the consensus I've seen from a number of bodies, that we don't want to encourage the use in children and young people. I think that the universal clarity there. And that the prime objective here is to get people to quit smoking. That's where the harm is. And again, the motivators for using e-cigarettes, including things like cost, relatively inexpensive, available, those motivators are quite strong. So the restriction on the use in public places, in relative terms to all of those issues, seems to be quite a small step in helping to balance the not wanting to renormalise it, exposing people in those public places against the potential benefits that may be emerging for people who do find them useful to quit. So that's where I'm finding my position in terms of the balance of the evidence.
Okay. I got my members now want to come in on questions, so I got John and Kirsty and Darren.
Yeah, one thing I'm concerned about is the effect on others in enclosed public spaces, people who are not using e-cigarettes, but the effect on their health from the use of those e-cigarettes nearby. So I've put questions to previous evidence givers on this, and you referred to the UK Faculty of Public Health, and I think it does say in their study that there is some toxic effect on bystanders of the use of e-cigarettes in enclosed public spaces. And it seems to me that if we fail to restrict the use of e-cigarettes in enclosed public spaces, then there will be increasingly, or certainly, given the expected growth of use of e-cigarettes, a new factor, if you like, in terms of adding a pollutant to that air. And I think we've got this new evidence from the UK faculty that points in that direction and gives substance to those concerns. So I just wonder really whether you think, as a government and as a minister, you've given enough prominence to that aspect of the issues, the effect on bystanders in enclosed public spaces, whether you think greater prominence perhaps should be given to those concerns. And is there any other evidence emerging that reinforces the points made by the UK faculty?
So, thank you, John, for that. Just to be clear, Chair, the three grounds that we have always used in support of our modest proposals in this part of the bill are that unless you do bring the use of e-cigarettes into line with conventional cigarettes in enclosed public spaces, you will make the enforcement of the tobacco ban more difficult to achieve, that it will lead to renormalisation, and it will lead to a gateway effect as far as children are concerned. So we have never relied on the line of argument that John has just put forward. I remember being asked this question, I think, by Kirsty the last time I appeared before you. My answer really is the same now as it was then, that it's not for me to make this case, because what we have secured in Wales is that in enclosed public spaces, the air you breathe is clean. And that's the position we want to preserve. It's for those people who think that the level of air quality should be lowered to make that case. And that's what allowing people to use an e-cigarette in places where they cannot use a conventional cigarette achieves. You're quite right, John, to say that the UK Faculty of Public Health said that the toxic effects of e-cigarette aerosols on bystanders are poorly understood, but they are clearly greater than zero. In other words, the only thing that the use of an e-cigarette in a place that you can't use a conventional cigarette can do to air quality is to make it worse and to make any risks that exist higher for bystanders. Now, I think last time I was here, I quoted the evidence that was emerging through Dr. Hussey's counterpart in California, that e-cigarette aerosols contain at least 10 chemicals on Californians' list of chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harms. And I think you asked me whether there was any further evidence that had emerged since I was last here. And there is a report published this month. It's a report of the... make sure I give you the correct title. It's a report, again, published in California by the watchdog, the equivalent of our Natural Resources Wales in the Californian context. It looked at 97 different types of e-cigarettes to analyse what they gave off in terms of vapour. It found that in 50 of the 97, the vapour had higher levels of one or both of the two cancer-causing chemicals that it analysed, above the levels permitted in California, and that in one case, the level of formaldehyde emitted by the e-cigarette was 470 times higher than the safe limit identified in Californian law. So we don't rely on this because it isn't for me to rely on it. It's for those people who are keen to see e-cigarettes being used in enclosed public spaces to explain to all those other members of the public while the air that they will breathe in future will be less secure than the air they breathe today. And that's the position that they will have to defend rather than me.
Minister, before we ask and move on, obviously we try to keep up as much as we can with the research that's coming out, because it's continually coming out. But if you could pass us details of the links to that research, it would be very helpful.
Of course, yes.
John, you come back, Nathan?
Thank you, Chair.
Kirsty?
Thank you very much. Could you clarify the position of heated tobacco products and whether they are addressed in this legislation?
I'll make sure that I'll ask Sue, who probably knows the detail of that better than I will.
Yeah, we believe the definition that's in the bill does cover heated tobacco products.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.